Hello, everyone. My name is Zach Wolf, and welcome to my podcast. Today's guest is MK Bryan. MK is the founder and CEO of EmpoweRx. She is also an ex-travel nurse recruiter turned entrepreneur. She trains travel nurses on how to cut out the middleman and make up to 40% more money. This is by becoming an ICOSA, an independent clinician-owned staffing agency. If you think this is something you might enjoy, then check out the episode. Hope you enjoy it. All right, MK, thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Zach.
So let's talk about EmpoweRx. What is EmpoweRx, and explain how and why that you created this company.
Sure. So EmpoweRx, it organically started through my journey of changing careers. So in 2015, I was at a point in my professional life and kind of my personal life where it was a good time to look at a career change. And I had always been interested in becoming a nurse. And then specifically travel nursing, because I remember a very vivid memory that I have of sitting in a doctor's office many years ago at this point, that I saw this advertisement where you could like go to Hawaii and be a nurse. And this was way before kind of the big travel boom, like I said, many, many years ago. And it always stuck in my mind. And so in 2015, I set out to do that. So I went back to school, started getting my prerequisites for nursing and all that kind of good stuff, and started working as a travel nurse recruiter, which just made sense. I had a ton of experience working as territory manager, sales manager throughout a couple different industries throughout my professional career. So I had a lot of experience with recruiting team members. So it just kind of seemed like a good fit, and it would allow me to get a feeling of how the industry worked from the inside out while I was going back to school. And so that was how it really started. I started working as a travel recruiter at a small, relatively to the industry, family-owned staffing agency in Portland, Oregon, where I lived at the time. And immediately was successful. Loved talking with nurses. Nurses were the primary, but of course we also, offered allied health professionals contracts as well. And so, yeah, so it just started working in the industry, and very quickly you can start to see how it functions, and kind of some of what I considered kind of unethical relationships, unethical behavior
Mm.
in the professional environment, not necessarily speaking of like my colleagues, but looking at like the entire industry and how it was set up, all the
Mhm.
tiers, and where the focus was, and how very specifically how the clinicians were treated, and kind of thought of much more like a commodity. Um, Whereas myself going into it, with this idealistic mindset and loving nurses and all the wonderful experiences that I've had with nurses throughout my life and all that kind of good stuff, it was kind of shocking, to be totally honest. And so through that journey, again, I was pretty successful. It's pretty easy to be successful if you respect people, you're sincere and genuine. And I also, um, you know, wasn't super focused on my commission. So I was always willing to pay more as a recruiter. So that's also will make you pretty successful in the
Mhm.
industry. And anyway, so then from there, I was actually recruited out of that agency into a large national agency as a staffing manager. Um, and when I got there, obviously as a manager, you have a lot more, oversight of what's going on. You've got a lot more, opportunities to kind of look at behind the curtain type of deal. So, while I was working as a staffing manager for a national large agency, it became really clear to me that I think that there needed to be some changes.
Mhm.
And I was really drawing on my experience, throughout my life. I, grew up, my grandfather had a plumbing supply store. Like we all were small business owners, very entrepreneurial. My stepdad the same way. So I grew up around business owners. I cut my teeth professionally in the salon industry, which is extremely entrepreneurial. And so it really just kind of hit me one day that if we could empower medical professionals to be their own small businesses, we would help them to earn more money, save on taxes, as well as be able to offer cost savings to healthcare organizations, because you're cutting out multiple layers of middlemen, not just one middleman. You're talking about three, minimum. And obviously each of those layers makes their cut. So streamlining the process, with going straight from healthcare professional to the healthcare organization just seemed to make sense to me. And so the idea was born, right there sitting at my desk at the agency. And it's just grown organically from there, from that moment. So it was interesting during this pivotal, week, of the idea and all that good stuff. I spoke with two nurses that were direct contracting.
Mm-hmm.
And so serendipity or fate or whatever word you like to use, it was kind of interesting to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I actually took one of the numbers of the one nurse and called them outside of work and said, "Hey, I've got this idea that I'd like to run by you. Would you listen to me?"
Mm-hmm.
And he said, "Sure." And he invited me over to his house. Very nice man. And I sat in his living room and pitched my entire idea for the clinician entrepreneurship program.
Mm-hmm.
And he wished that he would have met me 4 years ago, is what he said. So yeah, from there, we've grown. We started with consulting, building the clinician entrepreneurship program,
Mm-hmm.
and then now looking to scale to be able to offer a vendor platform that is, healthcare professional friendly. So I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if I said too much, but that's kind of my
No,
story.
I I think that was an excellent introduction. And I think the great thing is that you solve multiple problems with what you do. It's not, it's multifaceted. So you're attacking so many things at one time, which, makes it so great. When did you start the company? How long have you been in the business?
Yeah, so it technically started kind of consulting in like 2017 and incorporated soon after that. We've been in business for over 5 years technically. And the first, one of the things that was really important to me was to build with integrity, and really have a strong proof of concept, because a lot
Mm-hmm.
of the things that we're dealing with they can seem complicated. They're really not, but they can seem complicated.
Mm-hmm.
So when you factor in, federal labor laws and tax code and the heavy compliance of those items, it was really important to me to have an iterative approach where we kind of went step by step with a proof of concept that this really could be scalable, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so we started with that, and then here we are today.
Yeah.
You know,
And your background as a travel nurse recruiter and managing a recruiting company, I think that really shows your credibility because you understand all these nuanced details, the intricacies of how everything works in the system.
yeah, yeah, that's been a big part of our mission and especially in the early days, is really that educational piece, of how the industry works. It's actually quite shocking often, especially in the beginning, in the early days of the company and building our program out, how many folks were traveling and really had absolutely no idea how the system worked.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been a really, really big part of our mission and continues to be. And as we've progressed over the years, it's equally as shocking how many healthcare organization leaders I mean, CFO, CEO, nurse manager don't
Hmm.
understand how it works either.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's been fascinating to
Wow.
see that. Mhm.
What do you think are some of the number one things, the top things that they fail to understand, the CEOs, CFOs?
Sure. So I think that the best way to really explain that concisely is I think the lack of transparency that kind of the third party agency paradigm has created. It's so multi-layered, and I think people don't understand how layered it truly is. So, and then how that trickles down to the healthcare professional. So
Hmm.
to try to
Yeah.
like drill down into a specific example about that, like let's say you have a bill rate, of $150 an hour.
Hmm.
Well, from a CEO or CFO or nurse manager, like a leadership position, they're like, oh, they're getting $150 an hour, not
Yes.
realizing that at the end of that, you're talking about potentially 40% of that's gone,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So those pieces, people just don't fully understand, right? They're just fixing a problem and kind of within their own bubble or own lane, and don't really understand the bigger picture of what's going on with all the layers of the agency paradigm.
Yeah. So that can kind of lead us into talking about the inner workings of the travel nurse system, about what are these little things that eat away at the bill rate? What things do most people overlook? And what can we educate people on to help them to understand the ins and outs of this, how it really works?
Sure. So I think the first place to start is really understanding the MSP and VMS pieces of the puzzle. So
Hmm.
an MSP is a managed service provider,
Hmm.
a
Managed
vendor
service
managed.
provider.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So, and then a vendor management system would just be, it's a cloud-based software system, essentially. It's
Hmm.
just going to manage pieces of the processes.
Hmm.
Um, so, and you have a couple different ways that flushes out, but the way that the industry has kind of grown over the last couple decades is, you have a lot of large players.
Hmm.
Um, you've got, and a lot of those would be considered an MSP. So that's a large agency entity that has exclusive contracts, and I always use that in air quotes, exclusive contracts with healthcare organizations that basically mandate that the healthcare organization uses them exclusively for staffing.
Right.
Um, so they would have staffing pieces within their organization. Typically, they've got kind of multiple ways that they do that, focused on nursing or allied or whatever. Um, and then they would have their own vendor management system. So some of them have multiple ones. Typically, what happens is those large MSPs buy other smaller vendor management systems and MSPs, and they build through acquisition. That's traditionally, or they'll buy a hospital association. So they're massive. You're talking about billions of dollars these people are making, millions and billions, depending on how large they are. So you have the MSP layer, and then they'll have their vendor management system. They'll have a contract with a hospital, and then or entire health system, whatever that looks like. And then from there, you have all the agencies, right? So I think that one of the things that many people, and hopefully we've done a good job over the years of educating people, but a lot of people would think that, if they're with an agency, that agency has the contract with the hospital, like that direct, and that hasn't been the case in a long time. I think it's over 70% of healthcare systems use a vendor management system, which essentially is that MSP VMS paradigm. So, and I don't necessarily want to use names, but you can have like a newer agency that's come on the scene in the last couple of years that's like, does things differently. They say kind of market themselves to the travel nurse community. They don't have recruiters or this and that. And at the same time, all they're doing is part of that vendor management system. So they're not really doing anything very different. I mean, they might be, paying more, doing some good things. I'm not saying that they're not doing good things within, but they're doing it within the initial structure that's already there. So you can get, you apply to be part of the vendor management system, you get approved, you have to meet certain criteria for you to be approved. And then at that point, once you're approved, you're now in the pool that you can access all those job requisitions, just like all the other approved vendors.
Mm-hmm.
So I try to use real examples whenever possible. So I recently had a conversation with a healthcare system out in California. They had decided to move away from the exclusive MSP contract situation, which is obviously very smart after everything with COVID. And so now what they're doing is just transitioning to what they call a vendor neutral vendor management system. So it's just an organization that's still going to manage all the requisitions through this one platform, and they only allow 40 vendors. So 40 vendors can have access to all of the job requisitions for that health system if they're approved, just to try to give an idea of the numbers of that. So
it's fair game for all of them.
Yeah, unless it's tiered. So oftentimes they'll be tiered. So you'll have different levels of agency, kind of depending on size or whatever it might be. And especially if you have an MSP that owns a vendor management system, right, which is pretty typical in the industry, they'll try to staff first, right? So, they've got all their travel nurses in their system that they're going to try to do that directly with and fill the requisitions first, right? So they're tier one. And then from there, it trickles down to the other tiers. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. You have a multi-layered system that's designed to really put roadblocks in front of people. So getting access to those job requisitions, it's not just like signing up. You have to have millions of dollars in revenue, so many employees, you've got to jump through their hoops. And so that's kind of the basic structure overview. And then from there, you can just imagine that each one of those entities is taking a cut. So if you're working for the agency, ABC staffing agency that has access to the vendor management system, they have to pay their overhead. So you have the recruiter commission, right? The overhead commission or the overhead operating costs, for, they're doing compliance, right? Running their building, all that kind of stuff. So they're taking a cut. And then the vendor management system is taking a cut 3 to 8%, right? And then that 3 to 8% gets trickled to the MSP. So, you've got all those different middlemen involved in taking a piece of the bill rate out of, from each layer as it goes down, that number becomes less.
So typically, is it right that it would eat away around 25 to 35%?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're kind of coming back to that norm. During the COVID stuff, I mean, that was definitely higher. There was a much larger cut being taken because the bill rates were so much larger. But traditionally, when I first started the clinician entrepreneurship program and we were doing like one-on-one coaching with people, we would always say add 30% to your current rate. And we were usually within $1 or $2 of the bill rate. And so that would be a standard that I would say anywhere between 25 to 30%.
Okay, that's what I was thinking. So again, an example of an MSP, would it be accurate to say that it's Kaiser's relationship with American Mobile Network? So so AMN would be the managed service provider for the Kaiser hospital system.
Correct.
Right. Okay. And clarify again one more time, what does the VMS do, the vendor management system? What are they responsible for exactly?
Sure. So the vendor management system is a cloud-based software program that's going to manage job requisitions, submissions, credentials, and then typically invoicing in some capacity. So, if you want to use AMN as an example, they have two vendor management systems. They purchased ShiftWise as one of the first, actually, from, I believe it was the Ohio Hospital Association. And now they also own Medifis. And so essentially, like as a recruiter or a staffing manager, I could log into ShiftWise and I could see what job requisitions, what contract needs they had. And it would show me the dates, the hiring manager, the requirements, right? All that stuff that I would need to find someone that could fill that position. So, and then from there, let's say I would get a nurse that was interested. I would build their profile, which you're very familiar with, right? So you might have to do that on, ABC Staffing's portal, but essentially they're going to pull that information and have to put it into a format that they can upload it to the vendor management system. So, I'd upload it to ShiftWise, send it off. It would be submitted to the hiring manager. And then from there, they can decide, how they want to move forward. And then that takes a couple of different forms, which I'm sure the audience and yourself are quite familiar with it, right? You'd have an actual interview with them, even if it, was through the VMS. Now it's like sometimes just recordings and different things like that, right? Or sometimes even recently, it's my understanding, there is no interview. You just show up.
Yeah.
So,
there's a lot of auto offers.
Yeah, which is kind of frightening, I think. But
so there's a lot of these little systems that were put into place to streamline things and to make it better. Basically, it's to offload work off of HR. I mean, I would assume back in the day, before travel agencies became mainstream, HR was doing all this work, and then they found a way to delegate these tasks to other companies that fulfilled that need. Is that right?
Yeah, I would say sure. Within an organization, there would, definitely be the HR would be doing the hiring, per diem hiring, all those types of things. And then, through the years, I mean, travel nursing has really changed a lot, right? Yeah. It used to be that travel nursing was to fill high census, vacations, like there was specific timeframes, specific things that were needed, or like emergencies, things like that.
Yeah.
Now, we've come to a place where I always say there's very few true travelers. I think most people just don't want to be staff, which is totally different. But
most of the travelers, they hate being a staff position.
Yeah, especially I'd say, over the last couple of years, as we saw a huge exodus from staff positions with the the initial COVID contracts, right? Because the money was so enormous.
Yeah.
Now many of those have gone back. I mean, they're called boomerang nurses. You can look up articles, there's
boomerang
tons
nurses.
Of information, tons of information about them. We saw this huge spike in it. Everyone left. They went and got the big money, kudos to them. I totally get that. But now, rates are stabilizing, right? People want benefits, people want to be home. So a large percentage of those people have gone back to staff positions. So, so yes, I think HR, not to get on a tangent, but HR used to be able to do that. And then you had like hospital associations and different organizations like that would help with those types of things. And then you had the true agency born, right, back in the 80s, like Amen, things like that. So late 80s.
Okay. I was going to segue off of that, because what I was saying is that we have these systems that came into place to make things better, but now there's a better way, right?
I believe so.
What you're providing.
Yeah, I believe so. I think that change is inevitable, right? And I think it's about growing and making things better. So I believe
better
for a lot
everyone.
of different. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I believe
the hospital system and the nurse as well. It's a win-win for everybody. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but yeah, I always say my philosophy is I only deal in win-wins, right? Because that's really just the person I want to be in life. So And I think there's a huge opportunity for a win-win with this particular situation, which is, what I set out to do and what I continue to work towards, every day.
Mhm.
I think that there's so many different factors that go into our mission and the industry and the changes that we've seen, especially over the last few years, with a newer generation of nurses coming up through the ranks, that are just, they think differently, right? They want
Yeah.
different things. And so, and
Yeah.
these are all things, sorry, Zach, that we've been talking about for years,
Yeah.
but go ahead.
Oh no, I was saying I agree with you. I think that there is a lot of differences in the personalities between the newer generation of nurses versus the older generation. I was just thinking about that yesterday, actually.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that's who you are. I mean, you are the voice of that generation, and what the differences are. I mean, we no longer live, and even if you step outside of just healthcare, right? Because I've worked in several different industries throughout my career, and I've done a lot of recruiting. It's like the the no longer do we live in a time where like someone's going to be at a job for 25 years. There was a time where like that was normal. That was just
Hmm.
the way it was. And we've been slowly walking away from that for a lot of different societal reasons and all different things that we don't have to get into the weeds of. So yeah, so I think that there's a huge opportunity for a win-win. And essentially, when you kind of break down what we're doing and advocating for, and then all the data keeps backing us up, right? A recent study of nurses, I think it was about 1,300 nurses, that over 50% of them have a side hustle, and over 80% are looking to leave nursing to pursue being an entrepreneur.
Hmm.
So
Wow.
when that's huge,
Yeah.
right? And what I think for me, and kind of the foundation of what really started the heart of the organization, EmpoweRx, is that empowering people is important, right? And I think if you look at all the data, and firsthand, um, one of the biggest things going on with our nurses is that they don't feel empowered, right? They feel taken advantage of, they feel
Hmm.
forgotten, they feel patronized, right?
Yeah.
All of those things, which are a recipe for disaster. So if you're not, and one of the things I learned early on in this journey that I was so shocked about was that nurses pay, or their time at the hospital is lumped into like the itemization along with like bed sheets. When you look at kind of like a breakdown of that, of an invoice style of where those things go, and there's actually an organization now that's advocating to get that stopped after all these years. But the point is that what we want to do is empower individuals to want to stay nurses. And we believe that the way to do that is through small business ownership,
Hmm.
because the autonomy and the accomplishment that you have from being an entrepreneur, as well as understanding the financial benefits of it and taking advantage of those things,
Hmm.
is is really one of the solutions to this huge problem.
Hmm.
And so that's what we advocate for, is that we want to empower healthcare professionals in small business ownership so that they can have a seat at the table of a multi-billion-dollar industry that without them wouldn't exist.
I love it. So other people have sometimes called this independent contracting. Whenever you
Yes.
cut out the middleman, you cut out the travel agency, but you prefer a different term. You don't like the term independent contracting. You use a term called ICOSA, correct?
Mhm.
ICOSA. And so how about you tell us what that stands for? And how does one set up an ICOSA exactly?
Sure. Yeah, great question. So independent contractor and 1099, they are tax terms. And so I think people wield them without really understanding the implications of them.
Hmm.
And so one of the things that we wanted to do is create a term that was correct. So ICOSA stands for Independent Clinician Owned Staffing Agency. And essentially what that is it's a legitimate small business, but it's owner operated, like an owner operator business. So we don't really work with people within our community or programs not really set up or advocates for folks becoming like large staffing agencies. We're not doing that. There's plenty of ways you can do that. And there's a lot of different requirements to do that. So the ICOSA term is really a way for us to have a way to describe exactly what we are doing and what our program helps a person become as far as small business ownership, and kind of a play on, there's like NOSAs and different things like that. So we kind of did it as a play on those things, nurse-owned staffing agency, things like that. So that's an ICOSA. And the reason that that's important, Zach, is that when you look at federal labor laws and tax code, a nurse cannot be an independent contractor. And so you have to be able to pass a checklist, an IRS checklist, to be an independent contractor. And so this was actually very early on when I started consulting and then started to build what we now have as our clinician entrepreneurship program. This was one of the biggest pieces that we had to get right. And when you did, a couple of years ago, and still to this day, if you search that, there'll be like articles that tell you can't do it. And it's true, you can't, but there is a way that you can do it. And it's to become a legitimate vendor, essentially, is all you're doing. And this allows you to be compliant with federal labor laws and tax codes, as well as, most importantly, take advantage of the financial benefits. So if you're working as a 1099 independent contractor, which is rampant in the industry right now, there's tons of lawsuits. It's a real problem that we're solving. You actually are going to be hit with a lot more taxes. So it's not advantageous for the nurse to work in that capacity either. And there's no one but us really that's educating on that piece of it. Very specific in the healthcare staffing vertical, very specific to nurses. The largest demographic of healthcare professionals in our network is nurses. So, that's certainly, it's, obviously a huge population in the whole hospital ecosystem. So it makes sense. And so that's the term. That's the reason that it's important that we have a term, is to ensure that we're saying the right things and being set up correctly. And as far as how to do it, some of the pieces are relatively easy. And what we've done with our program is create roadmaps and step-by-step guides that take you through in a very, very purposeful roadmap of starting with step 1, and ending, with step 20, whatever it might be, and breaks it down into different sections. So getting started, small business finance, contract negotiation, sales and marketing, and then along the way, ensuring that you have all the tools that you need to be set up properly. So, professional partnerships of vetted people for all the different things that a small business owner would need. And so essentially, the easiest way to get started would really be to start, a single member LLC, is a basic fundamental piece to start with. And that is very simple. You can do it on your own. I mean, it's not difficult at all. There's some nuance to it, and that's, people often miss, one of the common mistakes I see in people that have kind of done it outside of our program, but then came and said, I need help, right? They'll start like a PLLC, a professional limited liability company, because they have a medical license of some type, nursing license, whatever it might be. And that's not really needed, necessary, or looking at kind of the entire trajectory of what you're going to want to do with this LLC, it's actually not the best entity to have.
Mhm.
So little things like that, little nuanced things like that is kind of where I think we really shine in creating this clear pathway with kind of taking the guesswork out of things with a proven setup. So
Mhm.
LLC is the first start. And then from there, you've got to start to figure out, a tax strategy and understanding tax selection and different things like that. So, but that's the first step.
Uh-huh. So in short, EmpoweRx does everything. Like, I mean, you're helping people from step one to getting their LLC, understanding tax implications, to the next steps. You help with getting the contracts at hospitals.
We
You
do. We actually
and
do help with that in
mhm,
several different capacities. So yeah, it's really from step one all the way through continually. We're always here. So it's depending on the person's individual circumstances. It might be that they've got a direct contract through their ICOSA, and then they're, need support with understanding, how to negotiate the bill rate or any of those different things. So we really leverage our expertise to be able to support the community in multiple capacities, whatever that really means, in a very customized way,
mhm,
um, through the clinician entrepreneurship program and joining the community. And then outside of that, what we're looking to do is scale so that this can be more widespread. And we started that journey in 2021 with releasing a pilot in what do we call our marketplace. So it's basically a vendor system that is ICOSA friendly.
yeah.
With
Marketplace is your VMS. This is EmpoweRx VMS.
Yeah,
Correct.
exactly. That is the
Mhm,
best way to think about it, because it's a vendor management system that's offering a competitive, disruptive advantage for the ICOSA. Some of the main differences would be, we have transparent flat fees that don't attach to bill rates, which a traditional vendor management system would. But essentially, that's the plan. Is we want to have a vendor portal where healthcare organizations can connect directly with ICOSAs and have full transparency on bill rates. And then we just help to manage the process and have a third set of eyes on compliance and, provide invoicing services and things like that.
mhm. So you're great support in the background, but for a fraction of the bill rate that a traditional agency would take out of that.
Absolutely,
Hmm.
100%. And I can share some links and things for you to share with your audience. Like our pilot, we did a pilot with critical access hospital in Washington and also a skilled nursing facility in Juneau, Alaska. So two pretty remote areas,
Hmm.
very successful. And the numbers we're transparent with the numbers of that pilot to showcase the value. I mean, you're talking about, nurses making over 40% more than they would with an agency. And that's
Hmm.
typically why people start traveling, right?
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
make more money.
Yeah. It was one of the main motives for me, but it's for two reasons at least. I know that you get a larger portion of the bill rate, and it's also the tax implications regarding an LLC, because you at this point you're able to write off expenses, everything related to your business. You write that
Mhm.
off, you get a tax deduction. It's not like being a W-2 employee where you just have this standard deduction and it kind of stops there. Now you have the whole IRS tax code to take advantage of.
Absolutely. That's such a huge part of what we do, is really show people how to leverage that legitimately. There's a lot of organizations out there right now that have crept up over the past 2 years that are kind of showing people how to not do that legitimately. But what we do is 100% above board, and the tax savings and the ability to make the to maximize the income it's off the charts. I mean, the secret sauce is really in how you set up your tax strategy. That is really, and we get a lot of feedback about that, about how that is, it's just a game changer for people and how deep we get into that. So, when you look at the traditional travel pay structure, right, you've got that small hourly rate, and then you've got those tax-free stipends, and that's where it becomes appealing, right? You're getting tax-free money.
Mm-hmm.
And we could have a whole podcast about how, the pitfalls of that, but regardless, what we advocate and showcase in our curriculum is, not only are you going to earn the full bill rate, but then how do you manage that bill rate, right? And if you have a tax strategy that allows you to pay yourself, right, as a W-2 employee, which is super important because you want to pay into your personal tax liability, but then has the ability to offer you a dividend that's free from personal income tax. So, when people talk about tax-free stipends and how important they are, and I say they're nothing compared to what we can show you what to do. You'll be laughing about the tax-free stipends at the end of the day, and it's true. And our pilot really showcased that.
Yeah. So on average, you say how much percent could one expect to see as an increase? 40%?
Yeah, during our pilot data, they were making over 40% from an agency.
Wow.
And we have a white paper that we did that I can share some links for the audience that they can take a look at that information. But, I believe it was over 28,000 in tax savings. Yep. So it's pretty significant.
That's big. I'm sure a lot of people would like to have an extra 40% in their wallet right now.
Absolutely. And you have to understand that stat is over like an agency. So, and again, bill rates are changing now, but I think it only makes it more relevant what we're advocating to do, because the lower the bill rate, obviously, the more you want to make sure that you're maximizing that tax savings. So,
why are we not seeing more of this today?
It's a great question. So, a lot of it has to do with, very, very big established players, right? I mean, we are up against giants essentially. And so it's really difficult to kind of break into a health system, like a larger health system, especially. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we have is we're up against multi-billion-dollar companies. And I've had, tons of meetings over the last couple of years as we kind of started to shift our focus towards healthcare organization, marketplace agreements. And it's, it's education, and it's essentially kind of offering our value proposition. And I've had, healthcare systems say, we totally get all the value that you're offering, but we're just going to hold off right now. So I think that the conclusion that I've come to is that it really just comes down to established players. So we're still a new kid on the block. And that, I think, is a big player to it. I think the other real factor, and this is something that I think, for your audience, I would, encourage them to explore doing, is that, as the healthcare professionals, as the nurses, you have to let your voice be heard, right? And if this is something that you really want to do, I think there's a lot of power in numbers. So, if you go to any of the large players in the space, even the newcomers like, CareRev or Shift Apps, right, which don't do what we do and have a lot of illegal practices, but essentially they're gaining market traction. And that's because, hundreds of thousands of nurses are signed up. So there's a big piece of this that really comes down to numbers. So, we have I'd say over 16,000 in a wider network throughout like social media. And if each one of those nurses or allied health, whatever they might be, those healthcare professionals signed up on our marketplace, which is free, that's their voice being heard saying, we want to do this, right? We want to be taken seriously because we can then say, well, we have 20,000 nurses that want to do this. So
Mhm. So
established players.
sign up for Marketplace.
Yeah, yeah, that'd be
Everybody watching,
great.
sign up. It's like, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
And yeah, and that's really what it comes down to is I think that there's established players. Um, and then it's a numbers game of, if we have 50,000 nurses on our platform, how can they say no? And that, then there's just other nuances to the sales cycle. I mean, the healthcare sales cycle is really long, and it has multiple gatekeepers. So I think that, those pieces are all part of the equation. And that doesn't have to do with just us. I'm part of quite a few healthcare startup ecosystem type of groups, and it doesn't matter what they're selling. It's the challenge no matter what, that sales cycle. So those are some of the big pieces that I think are kind of our challenges to overcome. Um, and so, yeah, so we keep plugging away.
Yeah. Awesome. You're doing a great job. Um, for the for travel nurses specifically, what challenges could they face currently in this current environment as an ICOSA nurse?
Mhm.
One that I would think of is that currently you're sort of limited to certain geographical locations. Would that be correct to assume that? Like in Southern California, for instance, there are rampant managed service providers who kind of rule everything here. So you currently small towns would be your best bet.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the initiatives that we're moving forward with over the next 3 to 6 months is really continuing to focus on rural healthcare, which has really kind of been kind of our beachhead, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a really great opportunity for the entire community to be able to go into that. So yeah, smaller rural communities, smaller hospitals without as many layers of gatekeepers is always a great place to start. Getting an advocate, someone that wants to be your champion is really, always a good thing as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that, geographic location can be a challenge. So if the traveler is limited to where they can go, that becomes a challenge, right? So if they can only work within this radius, then that kind of limits the amount of sales targets that they can put into their funnel.
Mm-hmm.
So I definitely agree with you that that can be a challenge. And that rural health and smaller community health systems are definitely a great place to get started.
Mm-hmm. Great place to build from there. And then, I mean, this is just the beginning. You're a new company with a fantastic idea, but I'm sure that once these smaller rural hospitals begin implementing the type of system that you're offering, then the other players in the game in larger cities, larger hospitals,
Mhm.
they'll be catching on to this, and they'll see the value in this for sure. So that's your
Yeah,
long-term game for this widespread adoption, but it takes time to get there.
it does. It takes a lot of time. I think a lot of folks, over the years, one of the things of kind of understanding and coming into like a sales type of mindset. So like an average sales cycle with a larger like regional hospital, not even like a no Kaiser, I'm talking about just like they have 5 hospitals, right? Like a regional healthcare system.
Mm-hmm.
You're talking anywhere from 12 to 18 months. So that's a long time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But that's standard. So like, and I've been through that cycle, where you're talking with the hospital for a year. And so that there's a persistence piece and a continual follow-up piece that I think folks have to really learn to adopt that mindset if you're going after those healthcare systems, which of course that's what we're working to do to kind of bring the jobs to the community.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, as a strategy, we'd love to become, a healthcare professional focused vendor solution for rural healthcare.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a lot of opportunity to do that. And that's a big focus for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm really excited for this. I knew initially when I heard about this years ago that this could be huge. It's going to take a little time to pick up and be mainstream, but I mean, how could it not be? Because it solves multiple problems all at one time. So
Mm-hmm.
it's amazing.
Exactly.
Yeah. Um, Another question I wanted to hop into, we're kind of circling back around here, but I wanted to ask you, since you were a travel nurse recruiter, a little bit of transparency about how they're paid. Like, is it all commission based? Are they incentivized to lowball travelers, to give a first time traveler a hard time and try to give them the least amount of money possible? Just kind of delve into that and tell me your thoughts.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So, and I'll speak from personal experience, and I'm sure that there's variations throughout different agencies, and some of these newer agencies that have kind of come along, they're like, oh, we don't have recruiters, things like that, right? So they might get paid a straight salary. I have to imagine there's some type of incentive involved. Even as a recruiter outside of healthcare, you're incentivized, right? So as a whole, I would say as a rule, the recruiter role is typically an incentivized role. So you're going to have some type of commission or bonus structure that's going to be tied to, a specific contract or the overall growth of the business. And sometimes you can get both, right? So when I started with the smaller family-owned agency in Portland, Oregon, you had a base salary and then you got commission based on your contracts. So you had to keep your profit margin at a specific number. To the preferred number was 28%, like not to go below 28% profit margin.
Mhm.
And then anything you went below that came directly out of my commission. So so the company still made their money. And then anything that I decided to give back to the traveler would be coming out of my commission for sure.
Oh, okay.
Yep. And
Gotcha.
then,
So that
yeah.
might
And then, oh, sorry, go ahead.
sorry.
Sorry.
I was going to say that might explain some of the discrepancies in pay between recruiters, because one recruiter might be willing to give up a little bit less for whatever reason. Maybe they want to make the traveler happy, or they're afraid of losing business. They want to, whatever reason. But then
Mhm.
another recruiter, they may be a little bit more greedy, or they might really be tight on money, whatever reason for them. And so
Right.
you got two people who just have, two different points that they're willing to settle on. So,
Yeah. And ultimately, at the end of the day, the company doesn't want to lose the business. Like getting the contract is better than not getting the contract. Meaning, so if you're a travel agency that's functioning within that vendor management system environment, you're competing with multiple other agencies, right? And so if you can get that submission and get that contract signed and then, get that placement, ultimately that's the goal. And at the end for the company. And then at the end of the day, the rest of it comes down to what the recruiter is willing to do. Um, I've had situations where when I was recruiting, I think, gone down to 13% profit, right? And my manager wasn't happy with it, but at the end of the day, they weren't going to give up the placement, but they didn't mind cutting my commission. Right. So at the end of the day, they want the business. They want to get those placements because getting a placement is going to help with multiple facets of the business, right? It builds a vendor relationship and things like that. So yeah, but it would depend on, I worked with plenty of recruiters that wouldn't do that. Right.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So if you see something that doesn't match up with what other recruiters from an agency are offering, if you see a lowball offer, is that someone getting greedy? Most likely.
I would say it's definitely a choice that recruiter is making, that they'd like to, keep their full commission for sure. Um, I mean, there's no other real way to look at it. The other thing to consider as we're talking through this, like, so the first 13 weeks, right? Because that 13 weeks is that magic number, right? It's not really required. It's the magic number where they can hit the profitability that they need to. That's how that works. Um, Another advantage of an ICOSA, you don't need 13 weeks, but so once you hit the 13 week and like let's say you get an extension, and I'm sure you and the folks in your audience have experienced this, you know, you can get an increase, right? You should go back and renegotiate. because at that point, there's no credentialing costs anymore. You're already credentialed. So that initial operating cost piece is now gone. And the bill rate is most likely the same. And so that was one of the things I early coaching would tell people that, once you hit that 13 weeks and they want to extend you, do not extend without getting an increase in your pay. So yeah, so little things like that. So there's all different kinds of nuance to it, but that's kind of the standard, and definitely what I experienced, and definitely helped others with consulting that experienced the same thing. So the industry does kind of work in one way. And I know recently, over the last year or so, I know there was quite a controversy with, people being on contract and then their bill rate being cut, and things like that.
A lot of
And I know,
bait and switch tactics is what they call it.
yeah, well, and even just not even like the bait and switch of like lure you in with this, but they were on contract, like already there, had already been there, and they're like, oh, we're going to cut your pay. And I had a specific interaction with one organization with that, and the organization, the hospital, they were like, our bill rate didn't get lower.
There's been a
And
lot of stories circulating
yeah,
about this, multiple companies, lots of nurses affected by this exact same scenario.
yeah. And it's like, well, if the bill rate didn't get cut, what is the explanation? The only explanation is the agency's changing up what they're doing. And I mean, again, that was one specific verified conversation that I had with a healthcare organization about that. So there's just so much distrust, lack of transparency, and that's one of the major things that we're really advocating, that I think is a really positive change, for not only the healthcare professionals but also for the organizations, because that number being out there, I always say in my consulting, like, for a healthcare organization, that bill rate is a budgetary number. I mean, they have to account for it, right? And certainly sometimes they have to do what they got to do, right? And they've got to bite the bullet and pay the higher rate or whatever it is. But at the end of the day, all salaries, including their contract salaries, have to fall into a budget. And so it's not just some number that an agency is pulling out of the air. It's a number that's provided by the hospital. And so if we can cut out those layers of middlemen and say, for the hospital to say, this is the bill rate, and like on our marketplace, it's posted, it's transparent, we don't have anything to do with it. Nothing. And at that point, an ICOSA can bid for that job and say, you know what, $95, I'm totally happy with that. Or I'll come in for 92. Or I've got 15 years of experience. Would you, go up to 105? That's how this should be, in my opinion, right? Transparent. The two parties that own the budget and that have the skill set should be the ones deciding what that rate is.
Yeah. It puts the power in the hands of the nurse to make that decision. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
100%.
I love it. Well, what else would you like to touch on? We got a couple more minutes here. Final thoughts?
Yeah, final thoughts. Number one, thank you so much for having me on. This has been really fun, and I love your passion. And Zach has been instrumental in our pilot. I just want to give him the shout out for that.
Thank you.
That he introduced us to a white label product that we were able to utilize for the pilot, based here in Nashville. And so that was awesome. So, it really is about community for us and working together. And that's, I think, definitely one of the final thoughts that I'd love to leave the audience with is, we really want to support and empower healthcare professionals so that we can have healthcare professionals at hospitals. I mean, that's really our goal. And so if any way that we can support anyone in the audience, answer questions, plug in and become part of what we do on social media, please start a profile on the marketplace. Just sign up. It's free. We're not going to bug you. We don't hound you or sell your information. But we'd love for you to get plugged into the community, because I really think that together is how we're going to make these changes.
Love it. I agree 100%. And how can people connect with you?
Yeah, so go to our website, www.empowerxinc.com is the best way to say it. And on there, we've got a wealth of information you can plug into our YouTube channel. We've got some great podcasts and personal stories that are great on there, as well as our intake survey is a great way to get connected with us. Tell us a little bit about yourself. And then we kind of connect with you and have a call and answer questions. It's a fun way to kind of learn a little bit more about the industry and tell us a little bit about yourself and get connected. And then, as I've said a million times, if you go to our website, you can easily plug into our marketplace and get a profile on there and become part of this growing community so that we have the numbers to really make those changes.
I love it. Well, MK, thanks for being here today. Thank you for everything you do. You're making the world a better place for sure. So,
Oh, thanks so much, Zach. That means so much to me. I really appreciate it.
all right. Thanks.
Thanks.